Hey, welcome back to Brighter Rays again this week, and this is number 2 in this study called Dear Titus, and we're looking at the very beginning of the book of Titus. And today I wanted to go over some background information with you, kind of lay the foundation of what's going to be happening over the next few months in our studies together. Now, with the beginning of the book, we have the author, and so we need to talk about him first. So that's the very first thing that this letter starts off with, which most letters do, is the author, and it says it's Paul. Now, it's been accepted from the early church on that this is the Apostle Paul, whose conversion and missionary journeys are recorded in the book of Acts. And he's the same guy that wrote most of the letters of the New Testament, at least the bulk of them. So that's the guy, and the Apostle Paul would be the missionary. He would travel around to the Middle East. He was in Asia. He was in Europe. So he traveled around quite a bit, sharing the gospel with others, helped others, and who helped him too, to establish the churches in the various cities where Christians came to faith and where they lived. Now, Paul used the social media of the day, which were letters, to share the gospel, first of all. Most of the letters that he sent have a gospel message within them. And in this case of Titus here, he gives specific directions to the leaders of those that are helping him, his co-workers, those people that are out there helping to establish these churches. So that's who Titus is. We'll talk about him in a little bit. So this is Paul, the Apostle Paul, and that's who wrote the letter. Now, what's the date? As with most letters, we can only speculate as to when the letter was written. We don't have that written down anywhere for us in the letter or really anywhere else, that's a certainty. So everyone has to guess, right? That's what we do. But we can look at the clues from the letter and compare those with the history recorded in Acts and other historical facts of that time. Many conclude that the writing of this letter happened probably after the first imprisonment of Paul in Rome and before Nero became emperor. This would put the writing of the letter somewhere around 62 to 64, 65, somewhere around in there. So that's probably a good guess. I mean, it's probably it's an educated guess because there's different clues that we can look at in the letter itself to kind of determine when it was written. So looking at the clues, we can kind of place it in that time frame. What's the place of origin of this letter? Well, again, we can speculate as to where this letter was written from, the clues that were given. If you look at verse 3-2, Paul tells Titus to meet him in Nicopolis. So this letter was written in or on his way to this city. The problem is which Nicopolis, for there were several at the time. Nicopolis means city of victory, and so you can guess why several places were called that in the Roman Empire. Many assume that Nicopolis in Macedonia is the one that's being referred to here, since it was the most prominent city called Nicopolis at the time. And there's a mention of Macedonia as well. It was the city that was founded by Caesar Augustus after the victory there against Marc Antony and Cleopatra. And it became really the capital of that Roman province there. So it probably makes sense he would go there because the other ones are a little more obscure. Probably more people in that Nicopolis. And it just makes sense. It's a good place to go if you're going to share the gospel. Now, who's the recipient of this letter? Well, we find in verse 4, the one to whom the letter is addressed, Titus. What we know of Titus comes from the letters of Paul. According to Galatians 2:1-3, Titus was a Gentile Christian who was converted under the ministry of Paul. From the different references, we know that Titus was working in connection with Paul during his second, third, and part of his fourth missionary journeys. In the book of 2 Corinthians, we find that Titus was an important co-worker who Paul held in very high esteem. He had only good things to say about Titus. Titus was sent by Paul to Corinth to deliver his letter to them and to work with them. Paul and Titus worked together on the island of Crete. When Paul moved on from there, he left Titus to complete the work. This is where we find Titus at the writing of the letter. He's there supposed to be doing the work that Paul sent them about to do. He left him there. We'll talk about him leaving there in a minute. Now, Titus would meet up with Paul again, and then would be sent on to Dalmatia. And some traditions tell us that Titus would return back to Crete eventually and preach there until his death, though we can't confirm that. So that's not 100%, that's his tradition. But some say that he went back to that island and kept on working there with the Cretans. So now let's talk about the purpose of this letter. The purpose of the letter is fourfold. First, Paul encourages Titus to put in order in the churches in Crete what was left undone, namely appointing elders in the various churches. Second, Paul addresses the proper conduct of different categories of people in the church, like the elders, men, women, the old, and the young. So there's different categories he addresses in this letter and tells them how they should act within the church. There's specific ways that you should behave. The next thing, third thing, is that Paul warns against false teachers. We get that again. I mean, right off the bat, as soon as the church started happening, you got false teachers. And so he's got to always confront that. And then the fourth thing is that he is instructing Titus to join him in Nicopolis after the work was done, after the thing that he was sent to do, after the thing that he was left there to complete was done. So after all that, you get that at the very end of the letter where he's saying, hey, come join me in Nicopolis. So that was one of the purposes of the letter as well. So he had that fourfold purpose, so you know what's going on. So that's kind of the background of the letter. You kind of get a sense of where we're going with this. It's about the church. It's about, setting things in order, and not only with leadership, but also with just, relationships-wise. And then there's the idea of the false teachers. So there's the idea of putting order, the right doctrine there. And then it's also a command for him to come and to go and visit Paul in Nicopolis. So that's where we're going with this study. That's the purposes. And, come back next time. And we're going to look at 1 through 4 here at the very beginning. Kind of get a sense of, what is Paul thinking about the very beginning of the letter, because usually the beginning of his letters are pretty packed full of theology and ideas. So come back tomorrow and we'll look at verse 1 and kind of dissect that verse for it. All right, so see you next time.